Good morning to you. Mark Sott with HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Tuesday, the 18th of April, 2017. So glad you could join me this morning. A lot to talk about today. We're going to go over in pretty good detail the latest information on the different ENSO forecasts, the El Niño Southern Oscillation phenomenon. A lot of talk about that in recent days, and I'm going to go over that. I'll also take a look at Invest Area 91L. Yep, we have something to watch. Out in the subtropics, it's not tropical in nature, and it really won't affect any land areas, but it is something at least to talk about. A pretty satellite picture, as it were. Hurricane season is now less than 45 days away. The Eastern Pacific hurricane season gets underway in less than a month. That season begins on May the 15th. And then a couple of weeks later, of course, the Atlantic hurricane season. So we're getting closer, and there will be more and more things to talk about in terms of what to expect in the season ahead. We just seemingly got done with a pretty busy 2016 season, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was sort of backloaded. Most of the activity that had any impact on land occurred after September 1st for the most part, and especially the bigger systems with the largest impacts, Matthew being the biggest. But then it went on in even after that, as we saw Otto making landfall in southern Central America later on in the season. And so it seems like the season, I won't say it just got over with, but that 6 months goes by fairly quickly. So let's get rid of me and take a look at a satellite picture. And this is 91L. And just real quick, I've talked about this before. I'll try to make this as succinct as possible, if I think that's the right word. Why is it called 91L? What does that mean? Well, instead of calling every cloud mass in the Atlantic that looks like it might develop into something, just referring to all of them as blobs of clouds, for example, this area, or if this were over the ocean, for example, instead of saying this one and that one and whatever, the National Hurricane Center has this naming convention where instead of, before it gets a name like Tropical Depression 1 or Tropical Storm Arlene or Hurricane Katrina as an example, they have a sort of precursor to all of that, and they're assigned a number, 90 through 99, and then they start over again, and in the Atlantic, the letter L, for Atlantic. And so if it was East Pacific, actually in the Atlantic it's AL, but we in the hurricane blogosphere, the hurricane world, we just shorten it. I guess we're lazy, and we just call it L. So 91L, we've already had a 90L this season, and now we have a 91L. Here it is out here, non-tropically oriented. The water temperatures out here are fairly cold, but the atmosphere is such that it is supporting some fairly organized areas of convection around sort of center of circulation. But you can see it has this large banding feature well away from the center, so it's a subtropical system, meaning more or less that the pressure field and the wind field is more spread out. It's like a large ocean storm, sort of a hybrid, kind of a mix between a mid-latitude nor'easter type storm that's more frontal in origin and a true tropical system. This is sort of falling in between the two, if you will. And it's interesting to look at, but really not going to bother anybody. If I mouse over the X, you see it says right there, non-tropical area of low pressure. And it's going to move generally to the east over time and really not going to bother anybody, as opposed to this coming off Africa and then winding up out here, as we see a lot of times happen during the season. This began in the subtropics to begin with. So there you go. We'll get rid of that. No longer any need to discuss that any further. However, as we get into the sea surface temperature anomalies map, where is this system located? Well, right now it's roughly out in this area. So here's the Azores and there's Bermuda. And so water temperatures are, depending on where it's exactly located, they're not too much colder than normal here, a little bit warmer than normal there. But again, it's April, something to kind of talk about, I guess, as a novelty. Anyway, looking at the anomalies for this week, starting on yesterday, the 17th, you notice a few things here. The Eastern Pacific cooled off a little bit from those reds that were showing up, and so we're losing some of the headlines here. Hopefully that means that the rains, especially the flooding rains, have stopped in Peru and western South America. They were just getting barraged, and water temperatures cooling down. This area, the Niño 1 and 2 area through here, very prone to rapid changes in sea surface temperatures, depending on the trade winds, etc. So really no surprise there. Elsewhere across the tropical Pacific, out here in the Niño 3 and 3.4 area, remember this is divided up into different regions. You have the Niño 1 and 2 region over here, kind of like the Niño 3 region, something like this, the Niño 4 region, and then in between the two roughly is the Niño 3-4. Again, it's kind of like that Venn diagram. Remember that from school in math? And so really this is the area that most of the people that track the ENSO, El Niño Southern Oscillation, this is generally the area right through here, the Niño 3.4 region, roughly, that most people refer to when they think about El Niño. And right now, as you can see, it's neutral. It's neither warmer than normal or colder than normal. It's generally where it should be. So no major changes in the Pacific. And meanwhile, in the Atlantic, yeah, we've really warmed up the main development region down here. Still some patches of right close to normal farther west between the Cape Verde Islands and the Lesser Antilles. But you remember recently this was colder out here. Now it's warming up. So we'll see, does this persist? It's only April. I mean, it's going to be another 4 months before this really starts to matter. However, we're getting closer to where we can start paying attention to this a little bit more. So this is our base map. Okay, this is going to be, I'll refer to this a couple of times more before we're done. So let's just move on to the next area. This is the Gulf of Mexico, actual sea surface temperatures. And you can see the 26 degrees Celsius line. Get this going here. Right about here. And that is roughly 79.5 Fahrenheit, or you can just call it 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's the area of the Gulf that's pretty much warm and primed for tropical development if something were to come along. So still a little ways to go. Northeast Gulf colder than the rest of the Gulf for now. But overall, the Gulf of Mexico running above normal, but not too much more so than it should be. And really, this will probably start to level out. Again, it's not going to run 4 to 5 degrees above normal in the peak of the season, where you have water temperatures in the low 90s everywhere, or even in a large area. I think it's going to level out. The Gulf is always going to be warm enough to support intense hurricanes. I think this anomaly here made headlines back over the winter, all of this warm water you see through here, because it led to some pretty warm, especially in Texas, overnight lows. So a lot was made of it, but I'm here to tell you, once we get into the season, it'll be plenty warm regardless. All right, so here's where sort of the rubber meets the road. Let's really talk about this ENSO, and you might as well get comfortable, because this is going to be a pretty lengthy discussion overall. But hey, this is the beauty of doing this. I don't have commercials on television or other programming to butt up against, so I can talk for as long as you're willing to listen and watch. So the next couple of maps, we're going to take a look at the subsurface, and I want to point out some important things, because there's definitely this sort of tug of war between those that are confident and almost certain that there's going to be an El Nino this year, and me, that I'm not really predicting anything. I like to follow the evidence and see what the evidence shows, and we'll go from there, all right? And part of that evidence is what's happening right here and now. Okay, so with that being said, let's take a look. This is the subsurface map, and again, this has been recently updated on the 13th. And just to get your bearings, this would be the eastern Pacific over here, and this would be the western Pacific on this side, roughly over near Indonesia. And a couple of things should be pretty obvious. We have a pretty large warm pool in that subsurface. This is 50 meters deep, 100 meters deep, 150, and so forth. So yeah, there's a pretty large pool of warm water, maybe 3 degrees Celsius, looking at the scale here. That corresponds to that. So yeah, it's significant. We won't ignore that. This has been broken up. I keep forgetting about this new version of this drawing tool. Anyway, this has been broken up a little bit. You now see a lot less of the intense reds and darker reds in here that we saw recently, and I've talked about that already. This is easily changeable. This, however, is what continues to intrigue me, that you have this pool of colder anomalies persistent. And where is that located? This is what I wanted to show you. This is interesting to me. That is located in the Niño 3.4 area. I've drawn that in, outlining where that would be, roughly 120 west to about 170 west or so, just before the date line. All right, so that's really important. This is the area that's the Niño 3.4 region that so much of these forecasts are based off of, and a lot of the measuring sticks are used, if you will. And so you can clearly see that in that area, you know, there's only a little blob of warm here, but that cold anomaly is lurking just below the surface, and it's really not that far down. We're only talking a little bit more than 50 meters deep, maybe 70 meters or so. So I'm going to be really watching this closely, because if this is able to maybe mix to the surface or whatever and really hold itself, this Niño is going to have a tough time getting started. On the other hand, there's definitely been some talk later from the folks that follow this, Michael Ventris with WSI, and he's really good at following these patterns and the larger scale puzzle pieces. And of course, Joe Bastardi, Phil Klotzbach, all the big names that follow these larger global patterns that ultimately link up to hurricane seasonal forecasts are indicating that there's going to be a pretty good westerly wind burst coming across from the western Pacific, as the Southern Oscillation Index crashed recently in the -30s. That's pretty deep, and so that should trigger some westerly winds at the surface here that induce this sort of downwelling and a reinforcement of this warm pool, and might start sending it eastward to where it then can surface and sort of get the El Niño started. That's not a guarantee, but that's what some of the forecasts are showing in the wind charts, all right, and the trade wind system. Normally, the trades blow from east to west over here, and when they relax, and especially when they reverse, you sort of set that chain of events into motion for an El Niño to develop. So we'll be watching that pretty closely. So let's look at some other things that sort of contradict there being an El Niño, all right? This is the mid-March IRI, that's the International Research Institute Climate Prediction Center. This is their probabilistic forecast. Okay, this is from mid-March. This is what it looked like in April. And I didn't change anything except, you know, two different graphics. Early April, mid-March, all right? So we see here, just notice we had some of the forecast almost at 70% here. That's that line right there. And so if we go to early April, look at that. It's like, you know, it's not like the La Niña is really gaining ground down here at the bottom, but you notice we really chopped off those high probabilities. They went whoop and shrank. All right? So that's interesting. It certainly is. It has to sort of get your attention, I would think. And, you know, what else could I say? This is based on a whole bunch of different models, and, you know, this is what it shows in early April. Let's see what it says in mid-April, and so forth and so on. All right, another one that I wanted to show you here. This is interesting, too. This is the March 1st Euro, the System 4, plumes, 51 different ensemble members. And notice here, this is interesting because you had only a few, just a small percentage showing a La Niña. And I'm not even worried about a La Niña coming on. I'm focusing on whether or not there's an El Niño. Now, real quick, a couple of reasons why bring me back up. Not only is the El Niño important for shaping the hurricane season in the Atlantic, but the warming of the Pacific is like a very big thermostat being turned up for the globe. And the more of these El Niños we start having on top of each other, I think the warmer and warmer the climate starts to become, and that can be worrisome. We've seen some of the warmest temperatures recently of all time, and recorded history anyway, modern times. And so there's more at stake here than just hurricane season effects from a warm ENSO period. I like winter for the most part, and if we keep having these El Niños, winters are going to be, I won't say harder and harder to come by, but it makes it tougher, right? I mean, so we really don't need another El Niño right now. California's got the rain and the precip and the snowpack that they need. I mean, my goodness, what a reversal of fortune that's been. Now we need some precipitation down in Florida, but story for another day. And so tracking this is important, not just for hurricane season. So notice, back in early March here, the 1st of March was the initialization time. A good deal of the models here really pointing towards a moderate to strong El Niño overall. All right. So then we move ahead to April 1st, and the scale changed overall. And why? Well, if this happens, it's lights out, almost literally. That would be horrible. 2 of the members indicating almost 3 degrees Celsius in the Niño 3.4 area. Not going to happen. So at least we don't have to worry about those outliers. That's how mathematics and statistics and probabilities work. You can get rid of your outliers. But interestingly enough, back onto topic here, look down in this area, more members taking longer to get to the threshold of El Niño, which is roughly right here. It depends on which benchmark, a half a degree to 0.8, depending on the U.S. or the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. I believe they are 0.8 for El Niño threshold, but it takes longer, but still it gets there when all is said and done. The Euro not backing off that there's an El Niño coming, so we'll see. It's interesting, though, that it's kind of hedging its bets just a little bit, so to speak, and I wanted to draw this in for you. The height of the hurricane season, August, September, October. That's what most of the activity, when it usually occurs, the bulk of it anyway, normally. And you can see the distribution of the different points there along the Euro forecast. We need probably another 2 months of this. The May 1st and June 1st runs from this. Unfortunately, the public version here doesn't come out until the middle of the month. So May 15th or so, that'll be interesting to see what this shows at that point. Now, finally, the IRI-CPC model plot here, and really let's just focus on the dynamical consensus, which is this line right here that I'm drawing in red. Generally speaking, it's around 1 degree Celsius by the time we get to the August, September, October time frame. So roughly 1 degree Celsius by that time, right there. Hey, this is where my arrow can become helpful. And so I wanted to show you something. Let's just assume for a minute that it makes it to 1 degree Celsius. When did we last have that? Well, as far as I can tell, and we certainly exceeded that in 2015, but 2015 was a really big El Niño. It would be 2004. Now, there may be other years, but the most recent that I can recall where it took a while, and it finally set in later in the summer into early fall, and it leveled out around 1 degree Celsius or so, was 2004. And that's, a memorable year for sure. I'm not necessarily suggesting this year will be like that. But here it is. This is 2004 towards the end of September, right there. So I'm trying to pick an average here, August, September, October, so the middle to latter part of September. And you can see that the equatorial region of the Pacific had warmed up. And you look at the scale here, some oranges in there, and there are a few in there. I'll take the telestration away, roughly 1 degree Celsius. Now, how they measure it is different. This is just a snapshot. What did it look like around the peak of the season in 2004? And we remember how busy that season was for landfalls. There was only, 14, 15 named storms. It wasn't a hyperactive season, but we had some landfalls in the United States that were very memorable, right? And so if we have a season like that with 12, 13, 14 named storms, you can still get several landfalls. So don't let that fool you. And that brings me to my next slide here, the Weather Channel and their collaboration with their meteorologists and their hurricane experts, and presumably some input from WSI, and they're part of IBM, and I mean weather is a big deal. So this isn't just a marketing thing. They're really trying to nail this. I know there's some skepticism. Even Colorado State gets that. I understand it, because I guess we all want a perfect forecast, and when it doesn't land, we get mad, and sometimes rightfully so. But in this situation, what's it going to look like 20 years from now? We might be able to pin these things down a couple of weeks out to where they're generally going to hit, and you got to start somewhere. So here it is, the Weather Channel's forecast: 12, 6, and 2. 12 named storms, 6 of those becoming hurricanes. 2 out of those 6 hurricanes, Category 3 or higher. So they're calling for roughly an average season. And of course, a lot of that is predicated on what happens with this. And I will end on this particular note here. We really need to watch 2 things here, in my opinion. The first is, how does this evolve? I think that's the big wild card. If this El Niño really gets going, and we're at a degree Celsius or higher by August, then we're probably going to have the lower end of the forecast numbers. But that still doesn't mean we can't get hit by a hurricane. That doesn't tell us anything about where what forms ends up. But in terms of a very busy season, if this cranks up, we probably won't see it in terms of a lot of activity to track. And then we also need to watch the main development region and how the rest of the Atlantic shapes up. If strong high pressure cranks up again and we get a lot of Saharan air layer outbreaks out here, mixing all of this up again, and it turns colder, it could be a sort of a boring season tracking wise. But I hate it's cliche, I realize it. A lot of people were saying, slightly below average season when Phil Klotzbach came out with his just recently. And I kind of chuckled. I was like, I guess like 1992, right? That was a slow season, and we had Hurricane Andrew. And you guys know this already. It only takes one in your backyard and in your town for it to be a bad year, depending on how it is, of course. It could just be a tropical storm. And in fact, let me move me over here. You think about our friends down in the islands, all right? The Caribbean islands. Even just a tropical storm in Haiti and some of the mountainous areas can be problematic. And we don't have any clue as to how that's going to shape up this early, in April. That's just impossible. So move me back over here to get ready to sign off. So it's interesting. A lot of things, we're getting past that predictability barrier where more things should start to come into focus as we get closer to the season beginning, and it'll really start to matter in about 45 days or so. And we'll continue to get forecasts and updates. And it's intriguing to me, though, to be able to watch this on a weekly to monthly basis, all these pieces of information that come out, kind of like putting the plot together for a big movie that you still don't know how it's going to end, but at least you have all the pieces together, and it's intriguing for sure. All right, so that's what I know for now, a lot to keep track of, and that's what we'll do. That's what the off-season discussion is about anyway. No lower 48 weather issues to talk about right now. Severe weather season is upon us, so just make sure you are weather aware wherever you are. All right, that's my best advice. Just don't be caught by surprise. That's always a good idea, good advice there, right? Hey, thanks as always for tuning in. I do appreciate it as usual. Covered a lot today. I appreciate you tuning in. And if you're not a subscriber on our YouTube channel, now's a good time to do so. And you can get alerts when we do these updates. I'm also doing more with YouTube Live. I did a test recently using an old iPhone 5S and the YouTube app. Yay, congratulations to YouTube for getting that working like I wanted it to. And it worked really, really well. I couldn't believe it. The audio was spectacular. And we're going to be doing more of that. More YouTube Live going forward. Not going to replace what we do on Ustream, especially with our unmanned camera system, but doing more with YouTube Live, so look forward to that. And if you're a subscriber to our channel, you'll get updates. All right, well, that is it from me for today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday and a great rest of your week ahead. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll talk to you next week.